Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Awash. Today we are going to be talking about all of the Greek myths that appear in Madeline Miller's Circe. Let's jump in. I loved this book so much. I think that this book might be my new favorite book of all time. If not, it's definitely up there. This book originally came to me in 2018 when it had been published, but I had just finished up my master's in classical history and thought, whoa, I am way too overloaded with this kind of stuff. I am not in the right headspace to read this, but I am a firm believer that sometimes books come back to you or come to you at the right time, or sometimes they come to you at the wrong time. Initially, this book came to me at the wrong time, but boy, oh boy, did this then come back to me, and it has asserted itself in my pantheon of books, and it is because the way that Madeline Miller writes is so eloquent. It's perfection. It is the ideal retelling of a Greek myth. And the reason that it is the ideal retelling of a Greek myth, say that 5 times fast, is because she is able to take a secondary character, being Circe, make her the protagonist of this story, all the while incorporating all of these other Greek myths, most of which those characters are the protagonists of those stories, and make them secondary characters to this one. And I thought it was done in such a beautiful way and such an intriguing way that I don't know if people caught just how many myths are mentioned in this book. So I wanted to go over what those myths are, why they're important, and why Circe is just probably like the best book that I've read in the last many years, especially if you're someone that likes Greek mythology. So let's get into it. So before we really get into all of the other myths that are in this book, I think it's important that we really get into the nitty-gritty of who Circe is and why she is important. We first meet Circe in the poet Homer, who lived, they believe, in the 8th century BCE. He is not thought to be one singular person. It's kind of like a Shakespeare scenario where things are written in the Homeric style. It's possible that there was more than one person who really was Homer, but we meet Circe in the second surviving Homeric epic, which is called the Odyssey, and it is named so for the main character, who is Odysseus. Now, Odysseus comes to encounter Circe in books 10 and 12. This is because his boat let's go back a little bit. Odysseus is cursed after the Battle of Troy. The Battle of Troy is, of course, detailed in Homer's The Iliad. That's part 1. Odysseus is a character in that. However, he is not the primary character. The primary characters of that story would probably more so be characterized as Achilles, Agamemnon, Hector, Priam, the main characters of the Greek and Trojan War, Helen, Paris, etc., etc. In this follow-up sequel story, the Odyssey, it takes place after the fall of Troy. Odysseus has been cursed by Poseidon, and therefore his journey home takes 10 years, where in reality it should take a matter of months. And in this 10-year journey, he stumbles upon the island of Aeaea. The island of Aeaea is where Circe lives. Circe is known as being a sorceress or a witch who is a trickster, and the way that she tricks people is that she turns men primarily into pigs. So Odysseus, being smart, sends half of his men onto the island while the other half stay on the ship. She, of course, turns them into pigs, and Odysseus then goes on to rescue them himself. Part of this rescue is he encounters the god Hermes. Hermes tells him that the way that Circe transforms men into pigs is that she puts a potion into the wine that she serves them, and to counteract that, he needs to use a plant called Molly. By putting Molly into the wine, he will nullify the effect of her magic. He will not be transformed, and he does this, and in the process, he and Circe fall in love. So goes the story. He ends up staying on her island of Aeaea with his crew for a year, and he then carries on with his journey back to Ithaca. Circe, of course, has a long-standing history herself, and a lot of this retelling happens in later mythologies. The big one is the Metamorphosis by Ovid. Ovid is a Roman poet. He is not a Greek poet, so already we have 800 years, or give or take, between when these retellings are happening. Ovid was alive during the lifetime of Augustus, so we're looking around 30 to 0 BCE, and he ended up being exiled for writing a story called The Amores, which gets quite explicit at times, but that's for another video. So in this version, we learn more of the backstory of Circe. Circe is, again, a sorceress, a trickster, in the sense that she is manipulative, creates the monster Scylla, and that is supposed to be set out of jealousy, but we're gonna get into all of that when we talk about the myths in depth that are in this story. But if we continue to look at the impact of Circe, Circe as a character wasn't just important and relevant in antiquity. She ended up inspiring characters such as Morgan Le Fay in the Arthurian legend. And I ended up finding a really interesting article that was published in 1971. The article was published in the Virginia Quarterly Review. It is volume 47, issue number 4, published in the fall of 1971. It was written by Yvonne Rodax, and she wrote an article titled "In Defense of Circe" and cited her as an example of the independent woman and gave her an elevated status. This is really interesting because this is over 2,000 years later and still Circe is being cited as a character. And then that brings us to 2018 with Madeline Miller's retelling. So clearly, Circe as a character has evolved over time, as all mythological characters do, but Madeline Miller gives her a voice in a very unique and very poignant way. So let's start talking about all of the myths that are in Circe. It begins by Circe being born. She is the narrator of this story. She is born to the god Helios and his wife Perse. And Perse is a nymph. Helios is a very important god. He is one of the Titans. He is not one of the Olympians. And when we look at often our mythological retellings of Greek mythology, this is where they kind of focus. They focus on the Olympians and less so on the Titans. And the Titanomachy is a battle that took place between the Olympians and the Titans. The Titans were the original reigning gods. Helios is one of that group, and Zeus is the leader of the Olympians, which is the succeeding group, and ultimately were the victors in that war. But Helios, because of his elevated status in this story and in the reality of the pantheon of gods, is kind of on equilibrium with Zeus in that he doesn't want to bother Zeus, Zeus doesn't want to bother him. But Circe's father is one of great importance. He is supposed to be in a chariot that goes across the sky every day. He carries the sun with him, and then at the end of the day, her aunt Selene, who is the goddess of the moon, comes out and shines upon the world, and both of them are equally able to spy on the inhabitants of the earth while they are out during the day or out during the night. And this is a interesting beginning of our story because we see that Circe comes from at least one part of her parentage is extremely important, and then her mother is a nymph who was generally regarded as being not very important, but gives Helios the ultimatum that while he is allowed to take other lovers, he is only allowed to father children with her. He agrees to this, Circe being their first child. They then have twins, Pasiphae and Paris, and they have the final child, Aeetes. And each of these children is important. However, Pasiphae and Aeetes would be the more important other than Circe. Pasiphae comes to marry King Minos, who is from Crete, and she is the mother of the Minotaur, and that is a story that has been told in many different iterations. And then Aeetes is important because he holds the golden fleece, which ends up becoming the item that Jason covets in the story Jason of the Argonauts. So already Madeline Miller is setting it up that we have all these different characters and all of these different possible stories coming into this narrative, and she does it in a really excellent way. One of the initial other myths that gets brought into the story is that of Prometheus. Prometheus is a god that goes against the others and that he steals the flames and fire to give to humans so that humans can cook, stay warm, offer sacrifices to the gods. And he knows that he is going to be punished for this in this story. Zeus has finally decided what his punishment is going to be, and that is going to be that an eagle comes and pecks out his liver every day, and each night it grows back, all the while he is chained to a rock. This is monumental for Circe's character because the name Prometheus, if you translate it from the ancient Greek, means forethought. He is a prophetic god. He knew that this would come to pass, and yet he still makes the decision to help humans, help humanity anyways, despite the fact that the gods generally disregard humans and think of them as such scum that you wouldn't want to help them. And she has compassion for Prometheus, and this is where we start to see the new version of Circe, that she is not strictly this sorceress, this witch, which is often a characteristic and attribute that is given to powerful women in ancient times, specifically if we look at Pandora, if we look at Alexander the Great's mother. They are women in an elevated status, and the way that people brought them down, and by people I mean men at the time, was to write that they were witches, sorceresses, evil, and these are all of these negative attributes that have been attributed to them. But in this case, this is the first moment that we see Circe has a side of compassion. She's caring. She goes to offer Prometheus nectar after he has been beaten in front of the gods, as that is the initial part of his punishment prior to being chained to the rock. And it just continues from there, that we understand that she is a character who has many depths. And this is because she is tormented because of the fact that her voice does not sound godlike. It often sounds quite human-like. It's softer, and it kind of takes her down a notch in regards to all of the other gods and how they view her, and she is tormented the most by the twin siblings that she has, Pasiphae and Paris. One of the earlier parts of the story is when we meet the character of Glaucus. Glaucus in Greek mythology was a human who ate a plant and then became a god of the sea. Glaucus had been a fisherman, and therefore it made sense for him to become a god of the sea. But in this story, it's because he is transformed due to Circe, because Circe loves him and she understands that she can't marry a mortal, but she's desperate to be with him, so she gives him this plant that she finds. It transforms him into a god. However, even after this has happened, he doesn't understand that Circe is the one that has transformed him, and therefore he ends up falling for another nymph named Scylla or Scylla. And in the Greek mythology, that is, Scylla wanted nothing to do with him. She was kind of repulsed by the way that he looked, because he had almost a half fish, half human appearance, and she was really repulsed by this. And Circe in that story as well is jealous and transforms Scylla, but in this version, she transforms her under different circumstances, but it's still, we're now incorporating two other myths into our story because of this transformation and the fact that she says that she is able to do this. She actually confesses this to her father. That is why she is exiled to the island of Aia. And it is on this island that she really develops as a character, and she learns her magic. She doesn't understand for a really long time that she is able to change people and transform them due to the fact that she does possess this ability. This is something that all of her siblings possess in one shape or another, but it is where you understand Madeline Miller's brilliance, because while she is alone, she's not technically alone, and we then start meeting all these other mythological characters and start incorporating all these other stories. Because when she arrives on Aia, even though she is said to be in exile, she is not allowed to leave the island, but it doesn't mean that others aren't allowed to come see her, and one of the people that does come see her is the god Hermes. Hermes in every mythological retelling is, and in ancient texts, was the messenger of the gods. He is often depicted as having a hat with wings or shoes or sandals with wings, because that could help him fly faster, I guess. But he ends up forming a relationship with Circe, and she ends up learning a lot of the news about the gods and humanity from Hermes, and he ends up being her CNN of ancient times. And I thought it was a really fun way to introduce the character by giving them a relationship with each other. Now, I've mentioned Pasiphae, and Pasiphae married Minos, and together they had the daughter Ariadne, who is important. And later in the story, it is come to be that Pasiphae has sent for her sister, even though they hated each other. She's not sure why she has sent for her. When she arrives, she sees that Pasiphae is very pregnant and is about to go into labor, and she meets, while she is on the island of Crete, the architect who is a master architect or smith, creator, whatever you want to call him. She meets the man Daedalus, who is famous for the story of Daedalus and Icarus, his son being the guy who flew too close to the sun. Daedalus is an inventor, and he ends up creating the labyrinth to hold the Minotaur, because this is a myth that is brought into this story. Pasiphae was infatuated by this beautiful bull. Daedalus created this bull made out of wood for her to sit in so she could admire it. The bull comes, mounts Pasiphae, impregnates her. She ends up giving birth to the Minotaur. And in this story, Circe is the one that is able to somewhat control the Minotaur with her magic. She knows that at one point someone will be able to come and destroy him. But until then, she works with Daedalus and they create the labyrinth. And I thought this was an awesome retelling. She meets a really young Icarus, who again, Daedalus ended up being kind of imprisoned by Pasiphae and on the island of Crete because he was so brilliant that they didn't want to let him go. So he builds these wings for himself and his son. However, the feathers of the wings are bound with wax. Icarus is so excited. He ends up flying too close to the sun, but even though Daedalus protests to him, do not go too close, it will melt the wax. It doesn't matter, the wax melts, he falls into the sea and he drowns. It's a rather tragic story, but I thought it was an interesting way to incorporate it again into the story. And while she's on Crete, she meets Ariadne. Ariadne is another important character because she will come to love the man who defeats the Minotaur, her brother, and that is Theseus. Theseus destroys the Minotaur and puts an end to that story. But later on in the telling of this book, she has returned to Aea. She ends up meeting the daughter of Aeetes, and that is Medea. Medea is now married to Jason, and Jason is famous for the tale of Jason and the Argonauts, or Jason and the Golden Fleece, where he goes and he steals this golden fleece that Aeetes has. And even though it's only a small fraction of the story, it's just another circumstance where we're meeting more and new characters. And I thought that was just so awesome that we're getting all these different layers of characters and their importance, all the while Circe is the main character and Jason is very much a main character in his story. And there is a play by Euripides called Medea where she is the main character and is making them side characters. Oh, I just love it. It's so, so good. Other characters that are mentioned are the Fates. She mentions Heracles. She mentions Eurydice at one point, Persephone, Narcissus. There's so many characters that are mentioned that it's kind of too difficult to name all of them unless you're sitting there with a highlighter and you immediately write it down as you're reading the book. But a couple of the main characters that are mentioned and stories that are referenced is, of course, when she meets Odysseus. He talks about Troy and he talks about Achilles and Patroclus and Priam and Hector and Paris and Helen. And he talks about his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. And eventually another character ends up coming into the story, and that is the son that Circe has with Odysseus, and that is Telegonus, and they end up forming a really interesting bond. That they, being Telemachus and Telegonus, form a really interesting bond. It's just a really well done way of the story being woven in to incorporate all these different characters. When I picked up the book initially, I thought this was probably just going to be some weird retelling of her portion in the Odyssey, but that ended up being so much more. She's fleshed out completely as a character. You understand her reasonings for so many things, and Miller did it in a way that I don't know it will ever be topped. I don't know if we ever need a retelling of Circe, because this one was absolute perfection. And the last character and relationship that I thought was really interesting in this story was her relationship with the goddess Athena. Athena's chosen human, because the gods like to pick favorites, was Odysseus. And she starts coming to Circe at different points in the story, and you start to understand why. And when you finally realize why it is that she's there, it makes perfect sense. If you are familiar with the Greek mythology, you will know why Athena is there, but I don't want to be too spoilery about it in case you want to read it. But honestly, the way that she wrote all these different characters, all these different stories, these retellings, it was woven in such a meticulous way. It was so well thought out that it could only, in my opinion, have been written that way by a classicist, which makes perfect sense because Madeline Miller got her master's degree from Brown in classics and classical studies, which makes perfect sense because I feel like only someone who loves ancient history this much could write a retelling this good. Let me know in the comments below if you have read Circe, if you caught on to all of these different myths, different stories, what you thought of them, if you liked this book. I know that Madeline Miller has a couple of other different stories. I'm planning on reading them, The Song of Achilles and Galatea. I'm so jazzed to jump into anything that she ever writes. You want to follow me on Instagram to see what I am reading. You can find me at Fantasy Awash. And as always, I will see you next time.